So let's take a look now at the muscles of the leg, okay? We've got really three basic compartments. We've got anterior leg muscles, we've got lateral leg muscles, and the back we've got posterior muscles of the leg. And it's fairly easy if you find a starting point and then you work your way around. The big, thick, broad muscle that runs down the anterior aspect of the tibia, working all the way down over to the first metatarsal, is what it sounds like. It's the tibialis anterior. When the tibialis anterior muscle contracts, it's going to pull your toes up. We call that dorsiflexion, and it's going to take the sole of the foot and turn it inward. We call that inversion. So the tibialis anterior does dorsiflexion and inversion. If I go lateral to that, very hard to see on this model, but perhaps with the shadowing, you can see that there's a tendon here that runs sort of deep. To show you the muscle, the best way that I can get at it is to take this group off and look underneath it, and then I can see the belly. But if I look at the bottom of this tendon, you see right here how it's split. That little skinny muscle is working its way down to insert onto the big toe. Here you can see the tendon really clear. That's what this white stripe is. That's the tendon of insertion for that little skinny muscle that lies in the anterior leg. That muscle is called the extensor hallucis longus. Sometimes you'll hear it pronounced hallucis, tomato, tomato. It depends where you put your syllable. But that's the long tendon. The little muscle's hard to see. It's going to extend the hallux, just like the name tells you. Then we go a little bit more laterally, and I can see this muscle is just a bit more meaty. It's going to work its way down, cross into the dorsum of the foot, and it's going to separate into four tendons. It's going to go to digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that muscle here, again from the anterior aspect, is called the extensor digitorum longus. And it's going to serve to extend digits 2 through 5. On the lateral compartment of the leg, there's only two muscles that we have to worry about. This one here, it's hard to see with this bar in the way, but this one here is one we just looked at, extensor digitorum longus, and you see how the belly comes over the dorsum of the foot. Now we're finding the lateral malleolus. That's the bump there, right? The distal aspect of the fibula. So I've got a long muscle that works its way down the lateral aspect of the fibula. Here starts the tendon. It's actually going to wrap behind the lateral malleolus, dive all the way across the bottom of the foot to insert on the first metatarsal. That muscle is called one of two things. We either call it the fibularis longus, or instead of fibularis longus, we could call it the peroneus longus. Okay? Deep to the peroneus longus is a shorter flat muscle. And I don't know with the camera if you can see the orientation of the fibers, but you can tell the deeper muscle lies underneath this tendon. This muscle is going to work its way down and stop at the fifth metatarsal, and that's the deeper, thinner, smaller fibularis brevis. Instead of fibularis brevis, we could call it peroneus brevis. Both of those muscles, because they go behind the lateral malleolus, when they contract, they're going to cause you to stand on your tiptoes. We call that plantar flexion, and it will cause the sole of your foot to turn outward. We call that eversion. So lateral compartment's easy. Superficial and long, peroneus longus, and then broad and flat and shorter peroneus or fibularis brevis. Okay, so let's wrap up then with the posterior thigh, or I'm sorry, the posterior calf. So the posterior calf has some muscles that are superficial and it has some muscles that are deep. So the real obvious ones that you see here, the most superficial of the group, is referred to as the gastrocnemius. Don't forget that C in there, it's gastrocnemius. And I've got a lateral head and I've got a medial head. The gastroc crosses the knee joint, so it's coming off of the femur. Since it crosses the knee joint, it can have some action to assist with knee flexion. If I follow the muscle belly though, it inserts into this big broad tendon, and this tendon works its way all the way down to the calcaneus. So we call that tendon the calcaneal tendon, or you might hear it more commonly referred to as the Achilles tendon. Now before I even remove the gastrocnemius, you can see that there's a muscle that lies deep. And if I look at the orientation of these fibers, you'll see these fibers also go into the calcaneal tendon. You'll see how I can separate superficial and deep. So this deeper muscle that lies below the gastrocnemius is referred to as the soleus. So let me remove the gastroc and we can take a better look at that. Now the gastrocnemius is removed, and I can see this broad, flat muscle. This muscle does not cross the knee joint, so it has no action at the knee, but it has a common tendon of insertion at the calcaneal tendon. Both the gastrocnemius and the soleus are going to serve to help you stand on your tiptoes. They're very active with walking and running, and we call that action of stepping on your toes plantar flexion. Now, what's different on this model than some of the others we have in the lab is when I pull the gastrocnemius off and I look underneath it, I see this super long, stringy tendon. And if I follow it up proximally, you can see it's just a little teeny tiny itty bitty muscle. And that muscle there is referred to as the plantaris. And the plantaris just helps minimally with plantar flexion of the foot. It's a very small muscle, okay? So now I take the gastrocnemius off, I take the soleus off, and both muscles again insert into the calcaneal tendon. Now I'm in the deep posterior leg. And there's three classic muscles that run the length of the leg for the most part. And there's a smaller muscle that sits up here in this area we call the popliteal region or the popliteal fossa. This little skinny muscle that lies deep in the popliteal fossa is referred to as the popliteus. And the popliteus is just going to initiate knee flexion when it contracts. Here's the muscle right here. And in addition to knee flexion, it's going to help medially rotate the knee. Now, we don't really expect a lot of rotation at the knee joint because it's a hinge, but it does help to just kind of get the knee unlocked when you're standing in a straight-legged position. Then I've got, after the popliteus, three classic muscles that occupy the posterior compartment. And if you look down here by the foot, you'll see that there's a couple tendons that go laterally, and there's other tendons that go medially. I can tell I'm on the posterior leg if all of my tendons go to the medial side. These lateral tendons here are from the fibularis or peroneus muscles that we just looked at a minute ago. So I've got three classic muscles. I've got one that's on the pinky toe side, I've got one that's in the middle, and then I've got one that's on the big toe side. And here's where students screw this stuff up every single semester, and I don't know how to make it easy for you. It's just one of those things that does not fit the mold. The muscle that's in the center, this kind of broad, flatter one, I can only see part of it because that neurovascular bundle obscures some of it. The middle of the three muscles is referred to as the tibialis posterior. Now, I've got two muscles left. I have a muscle that goes to the big toe. We call that the hallux. And I have a muscle that goes to my other digits. If you remember, when we looked in the hand, we had the flexor pollicis longus on the pollic side. It was lateral. And we had the flexor digitorum, superficialis and profundus, on the digit side. That made sense. Digitorum on the digit side, pollicis on the pollic side. On the posterior leg, they're reversed. So this muscle of the posterior leg, that is the most medial on the big toe side, is actually going to dive behind the medial malleolus and flex your toes. That is your flexor digitorum longus. The more lateral muscle, which you would think is on the little toe side, is going to work its way down behind the medial malleolus and go to the big toe or the hallux. So the medial muscle of the leg of the posterior leg is the flexor hallucis longus. The more medial muscle of the leg, posterior leg, is the flexor digitorum longus. And then this muscle that kind of splits them and sits in the center is the tibialis posterior.